Great. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our SICKLE webinar series on value assessments for sickle cell disease. Today, we'll kick off the webinar series with part one, titled FDA Approval Now What? To begin, we'll start with a little housekeeping. All attendees will be in listen-only mode for the duration of the webinar. After the webinar, we hope to host a question and answer session. So please, throughout the duration of the webinar, type your questions into the section that's labeled chat, and there should be an option that says send questions to staff. If we don't get through all the questions at the end of the presentation, then we'll follow up via email for anything after the webinar. Also, this webinar is being recorded. We plan to share this on our website and social media pages after the event, so we invite you to send it off to anyone else in your community as well. So for a brief introduction of our organization, SICKLE is a nonprofit that seeks to elevate the voices of the sickle cell disease community and their stories. We do this through various programs and advocacy events that hope to engage patients, family members, advocates to get involved and influence policymakers, educators, and others to help improve the care for the sickle cell disease population. There's more information about our programs can be found on our website and our social media pages. My name is Maggie Jalowski, and I'll be the presenter today. I'm the project manager for SICKLE, and I lead our initiatives related to value assessments and to the ICER review. On the call, we also have Ashley Valentine, who's our founder and our CEO. And we also have Adrienne Shapiro, who is one of our board members. And they'll be available at the end of my presentation to help answer questions as well. So over the next month, SICKLE is hosting a 4-part webinar series. We'll be talking about value assessments and the impact that they can have on the access and coverage for sickle cell disease treatment. We recognize that the topic of value assessments is new for the community, and so this webinar series hopes to take a deeper dive into the topics that are important. Today's session is going to focus on the FDA approval of drugs and provide an overview of value assessments. In the next weeks, we're going to focus a little bit more about the decisions that are being made by drug manufacturers, insurance companies, and others that impact how we access drugs and how we afford drugs. And then the webinar on December 20th, we'll look at examining the cost of sickle cell disease. So we'll try to define some of the terms in health economics and take a closer look at understanding our healthcare and how much we're spending on sickle cell disease. After the holidays, then, we'll summarize all of the different events by looking at what's ahead. January will be a busy month for the sickle cell disease community in terms of the ICER review, and so the webinar in January will be a call to action to ensure that the community's voice can be heard during the ICER review. For today, we're going to focus on FDA's approval process and talking about value assessments and their impact. We hope that after today, you'll have a better understanding for what's happening after drugs receive drug approval, and then understand the importance for us hosting these webinars and trying to get the community to engage during value assessments. So we'll start with a look at FDA approvals. FDA stands for the Food and Drug Administration, and they're the government agency that is responsible for evaluating our new treatments. It's the responsibility of the drug manufacturers to test the drugs, and they do that in clinical trials, and then they bring the evidence of the safety and efficacy of drugs to the FDA. And then after this data is submitted to the FDA, a team of FDA physicians and other scientists review all the material, and during this evaluation, they're hoping to ensure that the treatment works correctly, that the health benefits outweigh the risks, and that they're safe and effective. Overall, this process could take up to 2.5 years. However, there are several designations that the FDA has that hopes to speed the process for the review of drugs. And they specifically do this for treatments that are life-threatening diseases or serious with a need that is unmet. And so sickle cell disease often meets these designations. So in the past, the FDA has granted such designations such as breakthrough therapy, fast track, orphan drug, and rare pediatric disease for drugs looking to treat sickle cell disease. These designations help speed up the application and usually take within 6 months for the FDA to finish their review. Last month was very exciting for the sickle cell disease community when the FDA announced that they approved 2 different applications for the treatment of sickle cell disease. The first was on November 15th when the FDA approved Avexvio, which was previously known as SEG-101, which is the drug from Novartis. And this is approved now for sickle cell disease patients in adults and pediatric patients age 16 and older. And then on November 25th, FDA also approved Oxbryta, which is approved for treatment of sickle cell disease patients in adults and children age 12 or older. Now, both of these medicines are expected to be available to patients in the coming weeks, if not already available. And both companies are committed to helping ensure that their medicine is accessible by patients. So we've included some links here from the drug manufacturers that provide more information about how patients and community members are able to access these drugs. So what comes after an FDA approval? Well, there are several decisions that need to come next, and all of them have an impact on various different things that affect our cost of the drugs, the coverage, and our access to these drugs. The day that the drug is approved, the drug manufacturers need to set the price. They also need to make decisions about how they will be distributing the drug. Insurance companies and other groups called pharmacy benefit managers, or PBMs, they need to make coverage decisions, and they determine how much they're going to be willing to cover patients for these new drugs or medicines. And then providers, they need to make decisions about individual treatment plans and what's right for their individual patients. And then most importantly, patients. And patients are at the center of all these decisions. It's your role as a patient to choose which treatment you want to take, in addition to all the other decisions like choosing your doctors, choosing your insurance plans, and what you want to utilize for your care. Please note that there's much greater detail involved in each of these decisions. And during the next webinar series next Friday, we'll spend a great deal of time talking about each of these stakeholders and the impact that they have on costs and coverage and access. But for this webinar today, it's most important to know that there are several important stakeholders, and each of them have their own priorities or their own focus in this process. And then one overarching question that all of these stakeholders are asking, though, is what is the value of these new treatments? Achieving high value for patients has become an overarching goal of the healthcare system. And then the next few slides will discuss a little bit more what we mean by value and whose role it is to actually make the decision on determining value. So first, what is value in healthcare? Value is usually defined as something that is held to be deserving or something with importance, worth, or usefulness. As individuals, we make decisions about value all the time. When purchasing a new outfit, we think about our individual needs, we think about the usefulness or the quality of the item, how much it costs, or how much we think it's worth. But spending does not always equate to getting better value. So individuals need to make their own decisions about what they determine to be valuable. In healthcare, these decisions about value are very similar. So we look at value as being defined as what outcomes we can achieve per our dollars spent. The focus of this needs to be in the results. So looking at what we can achieve from the new healthcare service, what we can achieve from the new medicine, and how we get good value for the money spent. However, there are many other questions that begin to surface once we start talking about value. For example, what kind of tools are being used to identify good value, or how do we know if we're getting good value for the money that we're spending? Well, in healthcare, there are several different stakeholders, as we discussed on the previous slide, and each of these stakeholders often have very different and sometimes conflicting goals. But really, Achieving high value for patients becomes the overarching goal. And what matters to patients and what patients deem to be important should really guide our decisions. And then other stakeholders like drug manufacturers and providers should only be rewarded when they're able to provide services that are valued by patients. In reality, though, all of this is very difficult as value in healthcare remains largely unmeasured and misunderstood. And to ensure that these decisions are being made, are patient-centered, it becomes an even more difficult problem. So the next looks at who is actually determining value. And one example is a nonprofit organization called the Institute for Clinical and Economic Review, or ICER. ICER is a value assessment organization that conducts reviews and determines values of new medicine and healthcare services. They developed their own value assessment framework, and this is a series of health economic assessments. They're very detailed math problems that look at value. And once they complete their 8-month assessment, they produce a report that discusses the value of these healthcare treatments. Now, there are several organizations that conduct similar value assessments, and each have their own methods and tools for doing so. However, for our discussions and for this webinar series, we're really going to focus on ICER and the assessments that they conduct. And we're doing this because ICER is currently evaluating 3 treatments for sickle cell disease. So we will need to focus on what they're measuring and how they're reporting value. Now, value assessments use cost effectiveness, which is the comparison of cost and outcomes. So ICER looks at what a medicine costs and then what value it's providing, and that's how it's determined its overall value. So why is all of this important? Well, because insurance companies use these reports. So they use the ICER report when making decisions. When they're trying to decide how much they should cover for a drug, they may reference the ICER report. And these decisions may ultimately affect how easy it is for us as patients and for advocates to access and afford drugs in the future. Let's just take a few minutes to highlight the difference between FDA's regulatory review and ICER's value assessment. The first and most important thing is that FDA is a federal agency, while ICER is an independent nonprofit, so they do not have a distinction within our government. And the FDA, their overarching question that they're asking is this medicine safe for the public? So they do this by looking at the safety and the efficacy of treatment, and they typically look at the primary outcome from clinical trials. They utilize clinical trial data in their review, and clinical trials are conducted in very controlled settings. They do this when new drugs are compared to placebos or substances that have no therapeutic effect, and they're used in control settings. And then the results of the FDA review is the approval of drugs being allowed to come to the market. Now, for ICER and for value assessments, this is a little different because their overarching question is this medicine worth its cost? And they do this by determining the value and the cost effectiveness of treatment. Not only are they interested in looking at the outcomes that are highlighted in clinical trials, but they also need to prioritize outcomes that are most meaningful for patients, because again, they're trying to define what's valuable to patients. They utilize clinical trial data since typically that is the data that is available. However, they hope to combine this with real-world data, since they're really interested in capturing how valuable this treatment is going to be outside in the real world, not in those very controlled settings that the FDA looks at. And then they typically compare these drugs to other usual care. So they're asking the questions of how much better is this than other drugs that are already on the market. For sickle cell disease, this is a little tricky because we know that sickle cell disease does not have as robust treatments as other disease organizations. And then ultimately from the report, they determine a price range that they believe is fair for these new drugs. So why is this all important for sickle cell disease? Because as we mentioned, ICER is currently conducting a value assessment for sickle cell disease treatment. They announced this back in August, and they're currently in the research phase, so they are developing their evidence report. They are looking at 3 different treatments, and they're assessing the value for each one. 2 of these are the new treatments that were approved last month by the FDA, and then the other one, Indari, had received FDA approval in 2017 and has been on the market for 2 years. So these are the 3 drugs that will be considered in ICER's report. And how are they going to determine the value and cost effectiveness of these 3 treatments? Well, they're going to look for data that helps them answer questions about how valuable these new treatments are for the sickle cell disease population. They're going to look at how effectively each of the drugs are at reducing healthcare costs, improving outcomes, extending the length of patients' life, reducing health disparities, reducing comorbidities or complications, improving the quality of life or the life that patients can live day to day, reducing the burden on caregivers and families, or offer any kind of other benefits or challenges. And now I want you to ask yourself, if you had to choose one of these questions or measurements to consider the most important component of how you define value, which one would it be? As a patient, is it most important for you to extend the length of your life, or is it most important for you to improve the quality of your life that you can live day to day? These are very difficult questions that ICER is trying to understand as they complete the assessment. And they also highlight one of the critical pieces, which is the importance of having the patient's voice in these assessments. Value means different things to different people. And in order for ICER to produce the most accurate report, they need to better understand what the community values and what benefits are considered most important when looking at the new medicines. They also need to understand if there are outcomes that may not have been captured in clinical trials that are really important. And they need to understand how valuable we consider these drugs to be in the real world, not just in the controlled environment of clinical trials. So the patient voice is critical for understanding how painful and disabling sickle cell disease is, how limited in effectiveness current treatments are, and how vast the need is for patients to be able to access new medicines in the future. Your story ensures that ICER understands the importance and the impact that sickle cell disease is having in America and the desperate need of these new and different therapies. Over the next few months, there will be several opportunities to ensure that your voice is heard by ICER. We will be collecting patient and caregiver survey that will help answer questions about value. There'll also be time for you to write your own personal letter to ICER and talk about the critical need for these drugs. So as a community, we need to ensure that ICER does not fall short by underestimating how meaningful these new treatments are to our community. So we encourage you to stay engaged with us. This is just the first piece of the large puzzle about value assessments and drug pricing. Our next webinar is going to talk a lot more about the specific costs of new treatments and the decisions that impact how we're able to access and what coverage we receive for new medicines. The registration links can be found on our website. And also please stay tuned to our social media pages and website for more information about the webinar series and about our efforts during the ICER review. Also, please I encourage you to reach out and let me know if you want to stay involved. As a community, we have a lot of work ahead over the next few months, and we'd like to have as many people as we can help us on these efforts. So as a summary, new treatments for sickle cell disease emerge on the market, and stakeholders must now focus on determining what the value for these treatments are. Value assessments impact patients' access to and the affordability of new treatments, and input from patients and advocates is critical during ICER's value assessment of these 3 sickle cell drugs. So again, thank you for attending, and we would like to open it up now to a question and answer session. If you refer to the GoToWebinar platform, you will see a tab that says chat, and feel free to please type any questions that you have and submit them to us there. We will be answering them. We'll take some time now to answer them, And then additionally, please feel free to follow up via email with any other ones you may have. I don't see any questions yet. Ashley, do you have anything that you wanted to add or chime in?
Great. Thanks, Maggie, for sharing this presentation. I would just like to say that as we continue to give these webinars, we would hope to see that this grows, and that if anyone after the webinar would like to ask us questions or give any feedback, we welcome all of that.
Great. Well, at this time, it doesn't seem that there's any questions. So again, my email is included in this presentation. Please feel free to reach out. Additionally, all of this material, along with the recorded webinar, will be posted to our website. So please feel free to share that and use that as a resource with others in the community. Great. Thanks, everyone.